On this week's episode, a biblical approach to selling with guest Tim Brown, founder of 3 Creative. Welcome back to Theology of Business. I'm your host, Darren Shear, author of the book Marketing Like Jesus, and this is the show that helps marketplace leaders to partner with God in business, to change the world and make a difference in eternity. The Theology of Business podcast is sponsored by Highbridge Books, which provides professional book publishing services for inspiring thought leaders. You can take the next step toward getting your leadership, business, or personal growth book published by requesting a free 3-video author training course at highbridgebooks.com/course. This week, we're going to be discussing a biblical approach to the sales process. And we're joined by sales and marketing expert Tim Brown, who is the founder of 3 Creative, a leadership company out to positively impact 1 million lives through life-changing books and trainings. Tim has a passion for developing individuals responsible for sales and business development and creating momentum around powerful sales engines. He was previously the president of Concord Energy Holdings. And prior to Concord, he was the founder and CEO of Radius Media Holdings, which provided a variety of marketing services ranging from radio broadcasting, including 12 locations in Colorado, 18 owned and operated live events in the Colorado resort communities, a large format printing company, and a sponsorship marketing agency. He's worked with companies like Cisco, Nortel, American Power Conversion, Zircom, and he's also the author of Jumping into the Parade, The Leap of Faith That Made My Broken Life Worth Living. And he's partnering with God every day in his business to make a difference in society and in eternity. So welcome to the Theology of Business podcast, Tim.
Thanks, Darren. Good to be here. Thanks for having me on.
Yeah, well, it's an honor to have you. I mean, your resume is just incredible. I mean, I read some of the sales accomplishments that you've had, and I'd love for you to share some of those as well. But you were the guy that I wanted to have come on this podcast to talk about a biblical approach to the sales process. And so before we kind of get into this, just tell us a bit about how you started partnering with God in your business and a little bit more about your background.
Great. In terms of how God entered my business life, it was definitely me watching my former father-in-law in terms of how he conducted himself in business. And it was common for us to have a lot of conversations around developing spiritual muscle, around developing good perspective on how you treat your employees. And one time I had asked him, I said, if you could give any advice to someone starting out in business, what would it be? And he said, always surround yourself with people who are smarter than you, and then you allow them to create and to make mistakes and create an environment that allows them to thrive, and you'll always do well. And it's no accident that the second word in the Bible is created. And I think that humans were at our highest and best form when we're creating. And as leaders in all aspects of our lives, whether that be in the community, in our professional life, in our family life, in our spiritual life, we all have an opportunity to constantly be creating. Every day, every moment is an opportunity to create. And that's how God entered into my life, was really looking at him and how he conducted himself. I really paid attention to his actions, not his words first. And over time, I started to adopt a lot of the things that I saw in my own style and methods, but, very much a servant-based heart about it.
So about how long ago did you become a Christian? Because I find that some people, they begin to kind of understand that God wants to be a part of their business kind of at the beginning of the journey, and then some toward the latter part, some in the middle. Kind of where was that for you?
I have always believed in Jesus Christ, but I would say that my real relationship with Christ did not start until 2009 to 2011 timeframe, where prior to that, I think I viewed God very much as being a candy store, as Rick Warren would say in A Purpose-Driven Life, where it was, going in and asking for things that I wanted. And that shifted for me. And this was the impetus behind me writing Jumping into the Parade, when I came toe to toe with almost taking my own life after having a fairly sizable business loss when the market shifted in late 08, 09, and not really having the tools of perspective to know how to navigate through that. And frankly, not trusting God. When I look back on it now, it was the best thing that ever happened to me, because it gave me much needed perspective across all aspects of my life and how I was holding my story before versus how I hold my story now, and how I feel like I can powerfully serve other people. It's that, I like to call it being Christ conscious, in terms of how did Christ live his life through experiences of others, in terms of how he taught, and through miracles he performed, and through words that he said, and all these just wonderful things that Christ brought to us here as mankind. And I believe that it's no accident that 6 out of the 10 commandments are about relationships with other people. And that we all have an ability, being all connected through God, to help one another. Yeah. And so that's my long answer to what had been a short question.
Beautiful, beautiful. Well, bringing the conversation to our focus today, which is the sales process. Tell us, how do you integrate your Christian faith and values into the sales process?
Well, when you look at the difference between transactional selling and consultative selling, really at the heart of that, with transactional selling, it tends to be very self-centered oriented. It tends to be very short-term in your mindset, and not necessarily a trust building type of an annuity that you're going into. A consultative sales process is really about long-term relationships and taking care of the customer, and being a connector where you're able to bring in outside resources if they need that. And you're always serving your customer and serving authentically. And that's what I believe is so fundamental about, if you want to be successful in sales, if you go into it with a Christian mindset about serving others, you become much more powerful in that, because all of the things that you're doing are intentional. And you're constantly showing gratitude for your customers, and you're putting their interests first. And it shows.
Yeah. And it's because as a Christian, your bottom line is eternal. It's not just financial. So when you look at it that way, I mean, that immediate sale is not the ultimate goal for a person's life that has a sense of purpose the way that you have it. There's a statement that I've heard kind of often, that it says, always be closing. What do you think about that statement?
That's funny. In my second book, I talk about that, always be closing, and I call it always be serving.
I love it.
So very different mindset. I think of always be closing as a transactional mindset, and always be serving as a consultative mindset. So great distinction there.
Yeah, because I mean, I think people they will write off entire industries after having come in contact with sales professionals that are just transactional, and they'll just say, oh, they're, guys in that industry are just money grubbing, and they're just out to kind of take advantage of people. But when you have that, do you find that it's rare for people to come in contact with salespeople that really take that consultative approach?
I don't know how rare it is. I would say, in my experience, that probably half of the people that are out selling, I think, are wired in a good way, and that they care about that they have good listening skills, and they've got a good heart about them. So but maybe I'm more of an optimist. I don't know. I think that everybody are good people, and it's just, we can be taken astray, and we all deserve second chances too, or third chances
Sure.
in terms of getting things right. But definitely, most of the people who I've come in contact with, I think generally speaking, are good people.
So what have been some of the most challenging ethical dilemmas that you've faced in the sales process? Because I've talked to people where, especially if you're working as part of a big sales operation, as you've worked in your past, there's a lot of pressure on people to meet quotas and so forth, and they might be pressured to do things or say things that just could be considered manipulation. Have you ever come in contact with anything like that?
Oh, absolutely. More than once. And
what was that experience like?
Well, I had one particular person in the when I owned my printing company that was very unethical and was looking for us to essentially pay a third party under the table, and that would be how we would generate more printing business for him, where he would send printing business our way by taking care of someone else. And I absolutely shut it down. I said, that's just not the way we operate. Everything is very ethical and above board. And, I think he was legitimate in terms of he probably could have sent a lot of business our way, but that's not the way we do things.
Yeah. Yeah. You could have stand to gain more money in the short term. But again, as a salesperson, your ultimate bottom line is eternal, and it's pleasing the Lord. It's not about getting the sale, but even as a result, you've had incredible success in selling. Like, what have been some of the results that you've generated by applying this consultative sales model versus a transactional model?
Well, with sign language, our printing operation, we took that from a startup company, and there are 3 different disciplines of printing. There's the major big offset printers, there's screen printers, which are that industry is dying pretty fast, and then there are digital printers, which they call large format, that print billboards and wallscapes and retail signage. That's what we did. And we grew that company from 220,000 our first year to 15 million in our 5th year, and grew that organically. And we did that by what I call doing the right thing when no one is watching. And anytime you have a new salesperson that comes in, part of what I tell them is, if you're ever wondering whether you're doing the right thing, the litmus test is, if you don't feel comfortable doing it in front of your pastor, in front of your wife, or in front of your children, then you probably know the answer. But
that's really good.
And so I think that in terms of how we have built our businesses over time, it's been the way we've shown up in the world. We go in with good listening skills. We really try to learn a lot about what the drivers are of the company, whether that company is playing defense or offense, because that will also predict a lot about that relationship moving forward. Are they living in fear, or are they living in courage as a company? And it's being, very mindful about how you serve, and very intentional in terms of, if I tell you I'm going to do something, that I deliver on that. A lot of times new salespeople aren't sure what to do when something goes wrong that they've caused. And I like to point out that you have a huge opportunity to build more trust with the client when something does go wrong, because that tends to reveal a lot of character. And if you go back to rule number 1 of sales since the dawn of time, which is people buy from people they like and trust, people really don't, if they have to choose between working with somebody to send their business to who they like, or somebody who they trust, they'll always pick someone that they trust. And to me, that's what you're constantly doing is most people also don't realize that we are either building trust or losing trust through direct and indirect means at all times. So when you don't return voicemail by close of business, as an example of that, you're losing trust with someone because they don't trust that their business is important to you. When you send an email to someone with a lot of typos, that's another example of that. When you send an email to someone and you blind carbon copy another party who then replies all to that email, you lose trust. There's a ton of different things, right? Where if you're anticipating your customers' needs and you're trying to serve, and you're thinking about your customer and what would I do if I were them, you'll always do the right thing, and you'll always be in a good position.
Yeah. So what are some of the other things that you do to build trust? I mean, obviously the more that like violating email etiquette and things like that obviously can breach trust. Like, how do you build long-term trust with people?
Well, I think it starts with how you show up, the type of humility you have. Mm-hmm. And I tell new sellers that I use what I call the 5-1 rule, where you listen 5 times more than you speak. Mm. And it's asking questions that are trying to pull out information that you think will be helpful, and never using a why-based question. When you ask why-based questions, you put people on the defensive.
Yeah.
Another way is, most people think that the first impression that they make is face-to-face. And the first impression that you make is not face-to-face anymore. It's on LinkedIn or other social media profiles. And it's how you're representing yourself on there. It's your picture and what you write, and how, like I said, how you show up in the world is really important. How you respond in terms of urgency. Urgency has a half-life, and the average salesperson takes 44 hours to get back to a customer that calls in and inquires about something. And 54% of all sales will go to the first person to respond to a customer inquiry. Wow. So, pretty powerful statistics when you think about that.
54%.
Yeah. And when you respond with urgency, it's important to a customer. It shows that you care about them. It's an example on my phone right here. I carry under iBooks all of the PDFs, the generic PDFs of all the businesses that I represent and the products, so that if you call me up and I'm at lunch, I can email that to you right from my phone, and you'll have the information at your fingertips within 4 minutes at the most, right? Mm-hmm. It's about rapid response and being able to send people what they want right away. I make sure that my email signature on my phone matches my email signature on my email. I make sure that I'm constantly provide all the ways to contact me in my email signature. I want people to have my physical address, my email address, my mobile phone. It doesn't build trust with people when you go on vacation and you don't have an out of office assistant on, but it also doesn't build trust with people when it's been a week after you came back from vacation and your voicemail and your out of office assistant are still on. It's those types of things, right, that you just need to be mindful of. Because like I said, there are ways to directly lose trust, like lying or not showing up on time, or being pushy and disingenuous with how you carry yourself. And then there are the indirect ways of, posting things that are inappropriate in social media, or wearing a lapel pin as an example that is offensive to other people in the room. Those types of things, which a lot of people overlook, at least in my experience, has been the case.
So being available for people and not taking forever to respond back to them is one thing I hear you saying. And then as well, you first were talking about asking questions and putting yourself in a place where you can truly find out what that person's needs are. And it sounds kind of like the difference between the Greek education model and the Hebrew education model, whereas the Greek model is, okay, I'm the professor that wears the cap and the hood, and I've got all of the expertise, just kind of sit at my feet and let me tell you everything that you need and everything that you need to know. Whereas the Hebrew model is a discipleship model where we're on a journey of discovery together, and there's a lot of questions that are being asked. And that was one thing that I observed from Jesus, is just the way that he would respond to questions with another question.
Yep.
And because it's such a better way to really help somebody arrive at their own conclusion of what their own needs are, if they can wrestle with those questions themselves. It sounds like a powerful technique.
Yeah, I think of Jesus Christ used very much of what I would call an empowered learning model, where you take emotion plus experience, and that's how learning occurs. And powerful questioning, right, will pull out emotions. powerful questioning will also shift perspective and will also enable people to experience things differently.
Right.
And that's, I'm involved with a nonprofit called Lead Like Jesus.
Uh-huh.
And it's an incredible servant-based leadership model where, they've taken all the biblical teachings of Christ, and then how do you apply that in your day-to-day life in terms of how you're conducting yourself and how you're leading your businesses and things like that. And, it's all about that, what you just said, that method of teaching and really trying to help people. One of the things that I love about Jesus Christ is I feel like you read time and time again how he could see goodness in people that they at the time couldn't see from themselves. Yeah. And he helped draw that out and help them see it for themselves. Right. And it completely transformed their lives because of it.
Beautiful. Well, what advice do you have for people that are struggling to increase their sales? And I'm also curious, when you came into this printing company that was doing annual sales of about 200,000 when you first kind of came into it, right?
Well, that's when we started it.
Right, when you started it. How long had the company been around at that time when you first got involved with it?
We started it from brand new.
Okay.
Yeah.
Wow.
Literally grew it from that to 15 million in just over 5 years.
Wow. So I mean, like, what are some of the first things that you put in place when you come into a company to help them with their sales?
Well, I think the big one is you have to understand what your unique value proposition to the market is. Mm-hmm. And when you start to understand that, a rule of thumb that I use is when you're a startup company, it's not who you know, it's who knows you. Right. And I always like to buy a box of business cards, of 500 business cards. And my feeling is by the time you give out your 500th business card, your business will be in a good position. It will be cash flowing. And it's just a matter of, being very vigilant about how you spend your time, and also making sure that you're very focused in terms of how you spend your day. What percentage of that is face-to-face calls? What percentage of that is cold calls? What time of the day you're cold calling? What time of the week you're cold calling? I don't cold call on Mondays or Fridays as an example. It's only Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursdays. Because statistically, most people are checked out. They're either catching up on a Monday or they've got other things going on a Friday. I do a lot of research in terms of the people who I'm calling before I get on the phone. My rule of thumb is every breakfast and lunch during the week, you're in front of a customer. And then you're with your family for dinner most of the time. A good way to just do that. And then, like I said, you just find different ways to continue to serve those people, continuing to bring information to them that may be industry related, not just what you do. And you just build those relationships. But you do it in a very respectful and humble way.
I love it. And that's, that sounds like some of the basics that's something. I'm in a startup company myself, which is a publishing company, that's been going now for about 2 years. And so these are some of the things that I'm trying to get into place right now as a small operation that hopefully won't be small for too long. So Tim, what are some of the things, or what's the one big thing that you're working on this month that you're excited about?
I'm doing the final edits to my book, Old School with New Tools, that comes out in July, which is a sales-driven book about how do you build trust. And the model that we use is called CUT. And it stands for, the C is for communication plus urgency equals trust. And the analogy that we use is, in karate, the difference between going to the board or through the board is 5% more power, yet the results are 180 degrees different. And if you go back to the number one rule of sales, people buy from people they like and trust. My book was a very much, this is the last 5% that you can do to constantly ensure that you're building the most trust possible. And so I have, a couple hundred different tips and narratives throughout the book. So it's been a lot of fun to write. Much different than my first book, which was also fun to write, but in a different way.
What are some of those new tools that you talk about?
Basically, the premise of the book is the old school aspect are all the core tenets, the core values that have been around in sales in terms of how you develop a relationship face to face with someone, kinds of questions that you ask, the way you show up, the way you present yourself, what it's like to present to people, and powerful listening that goes with that. And then but it's really, I consider it like an operating system, which is driven off of a servant-based leadership operating system. Mm-hmm. And then you overlay that all of the digital tools that are available to us today to activate, amplify, and accelerate our personal brand on a lot faster, more thorough basis than we've ever seen before. And the reality is that you need both old school and new tools together. But if you're using new tools on top of a servant-based architecture, it's an incredible combination. Mm. And so that's essentially where I'm driving with that is, the new tools that are available to us, like Evernote is a great example of a place to collect everything so that you can quickly get back to people. The way that I file everything, whenever you send a file to somebody, if you don't have an extension on the end that has the date that the file was created, it's a freshness date is what I call it. And if it's 2 years old, people don't trust the information that's been sent to them, right? Because it's 2 years old, right? In today's world that we live. I talk about other applications like there's, if you're friends with people on Facebook, you can use an application called ShoppyCat, which looks at all of your friends and what they post and what they talk about, what they like. And then it makes gift recommendations for them at the end of the year, which is kind of neat. Some other applications, I talk about Dropbox and how to effectively use that, how to effectively use social media and LinkedIn. And then other specialty applications like JotNot for scanning documents off your phone right there and things like that. So it's fun, those kinds of things.
Well, where can we find out more about the book and actually get in touch with you? What's the best place to connect with you on the internet? www.3cr8.com. Or you can always call me 303-882-4631. My mobile number is also on my website as well. And then you can get to both books and both of the websites from the 3 Creative main website. And you're offering consulting services too, right?
I do. Yes.
Because that's kind of the main thing that you're focused on these days, right?
It is. Yeah. Definitely working in both sales turnaround type capacity, and then also for companies that are looking to go through fairly accelerated growth and how they want to brand and position through that.
Mm-hmm. Well, Tim, I don't know of any business owner out there that doesn't feel like they need more help with sales, and your approach is one that we can be confident that this is consistent with a biblical worldview, with Christian values. This model of consultative sales, where you're actually trying to discover somebody's needs and teach them and help them to and helping to meet their needs that way, versus just a purely transactional sales model, which I think we've all experienced at one point or another. But so would you pray for us, pray for our listeners that God would just help us to do sales more effectively, the way that He wants us to do it?
Absolutely. Dear Jesus, we ask that you pray over all of our listeners today, and that you place on our hearts the ways that you feel will be most effective in following you and your word and your ways, and that will help serve other people as powerfully as we can, and will help us create meaningful and loving and lasting relationships. In your name, Jesus, we pray, amen.
Amen. The number 3, CR8 3cr8.com is the website where you can get in touch with Tim. I'll have the website as well as, might not put the phone number on there. This is going to be only for the listeners only. They're going to get that phone number. But Tim, thank you so much for being so generous with your time and expertise and just sharing your passion for partnering with God and business. Continue to go forward and do great things.
Darren, it's been an honor to be on your show. So thanks so much again for your own servant's heart and having me join you today. It's really been wonderful.
Absolutely. Well, looking forward to continuing the conversation.
Same. God bless.
That's all for this week. I'm looking for stories to feature in a book that I'm currently working on. So if you have a story of how you're using your spiritual gifts in your work in business, I'd love to hear from you. You can share your story by contacting me through the contact form at theologyofbusiness.com, or you can email me personally at darren@highbridgebooks.com. And if you don't know what your spiritual gifts are, you can feel free to email me as well, and I will send you a draft of the assessment that I've been working on that will help you identify what those spiritual gifts are and help you take the next steps toward applying those in your workplace. Thanks for listening, and keep partnering with God in your business.